This is Greek with David Hutchison. The article. We're going to spend 2 weeks talking about the article. There's a lot to cover, and I don't want to rush through it. In the first week, we're going to talk about the use of the article under the heading of the presence or absence of the article. In the second week, we'll take it some special rules pertaining to the article. Remember that the word arthrous or articular means that a word has an article. Anarthrous means that the word does not have an article. The article is the most frequent word in the New Testament, almost 20,000 times. You may be surprised to learn that the article actually has extreme exegetical significance sometimes. Originally in Greek, the article was a demonstrative pronoun. It's a pointing out type of word. It makes sense with its pointing function that it was at one point one of these demonstrative pronouns. Your mother may have told you not to point, but the article apparently didn't get that memo, because the article specifies, it particularizes, or it identifies. The article is a pointing sort of item. The article can conceptualize. So the article can do a lot of different things. In addition to anything else it does, the article does make words definite. Now, that's not the main thing that it does, and words can be definite without the article, but if you ever have an article with a word, it's definitely definite. Making definite is not the heart of what the article does, but it always does that. We're going to look at 4 main categories of usage, and we're going to spend most of our time in section 1, where the article goes with a substantive. We'll spend a good amount of time on number 2, where the article acts like a pronoun, and then we'll look more briefly at numbers 3 and 4, where the article can make a non-substantive act like a substantive. And number 4, one of the things that the article can do is simply tell you how a word is functioning in the sentence. It can be a function marker. And then after that, we'll take a look at the absence of the article. What does that mean for the interpretation of a passage? So under the heading of the article with substantives, which is the main thing that we're going to look at, we have 2 big categories. We have one category called individualizing or particularizing. This is where the article points out a particular object, and we're going to have a bunch of subcategories here. The second one, you could call it generic or categorical. Here it puts something as a representative of a class. We're not talking about one object versus another object, but we're talking about a whole class, such as the class of Gentiles or tax collectors. We'll see some examples along those lines. So under the heading of the individualizing article, the particularizing article, we'll look at these uses. Simple identification, anaphoric, the pointing back type of article, Kataphoric, the pointing forwards type of article, par excellence. This is when the article is used with a word that's either the best of its class or the worst of its class. The article with a monadic noun, a one-of-a-kind type of noun, like sun or moon. Sometimes the article occurs with an abstract noun. And then also, sometimes the article will occur with a proper noun. So we'll look at all of these categories. The article's function in simple identification is its pointing type of idea, where it simply distinguishes one object from another object, one person from another person. This is a very general category, a very broad category. So if you can see something else that the article is doing, you want to try to find that too. Kind of as a last resort, you would resolve yourself to simply putting simple identification. So from Acts 10:9, Anebe Petros epi ta doma prosyuxasthai. Peter went up to the housetop to pray. So we're not saying he went up to a housetop, but a particular housetop, the housetop. Matthew 5:1, the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, idon de tous oculus anebe eis ta oras. Seeing the crowds, he went up to the mountain. And here it may be noteworthy that it's pointing to a particular mountain. It's not a mountain, it's the mountain. The anaphoric use. This is the pointing backwards type of article. In this usage, the article will point back to a previous mention of the substantive. What will often happen is that the first time the substantive is mentioned, there will be no article. The next time it's mentioned, there is an article. So what this article does is it kind of points back and says, hey, you remember when we started talking about this noun, this substantive? We're talking about that same thing again. So, for example, in John 4, in this discussion with the woman at the well, there's a mention made of hudor zone, living water. And so the woman asks, Pathen un ekes ta hudor ta zone. Where do you get the living water? The living water that you just mentioned beforehand. Where do you get this living water? The first time the noun hudor is mentioned, there's no article. The second time it's mentioned, there is an article. Now, a particularly important example in James 2:14, kind of picking it up mid-sentence. The previous part says, what good is it, my brothers? And then we have, if someone claims to have faith, eon piston, lege tis ekein. If anyone says, lege, ekein, to have piston, if someone claims to have faith. Erga de me eke, but works he does not have. So what good is it? What good is that? What good is that? Me dunatai he pistis sosai auton, ? Is that kind of faith able to save him? Is such faith able to save him? The question is not, can faith save a person? But the question is, can that kind of faith? What kind of faith is it? The kind of faith that is a faith with no works. Can that type of faith save him? And of course, James's answer is no, that kind of faith can't save him. And if you fill in the blanks, it's because that kind of faith isn't biblical faith. There's another use called Kataphoric, the pointing forward type of article. Now, this one is not very common, and some syntax volumes don't even cover it. But it does occur every now and again, and since we did the anaphoric, the pointing back, I wanted to look at the kataphoric, the pointing forwards. What happens here is that the article will point forward in the text to something that's about to be said. It hasn't yet been said, but it's about to be said. There's a good example of this in 1 Timothy with this phrase, pistos halagos. The word is faithful. Well, what word? What word are you talking about? Well, it's this one I'm about to mention. Hati Christos Jesus elthen eis ton kosmon hamartolus sosai. What word is faithful? This word, namely, that Christ Jesus came into the world to save sinners. So this use of the article points forward to this saying that's about to occur. So we would call this a kataphoric, a pointing forward type of article. The article par excellence, here the article points to a word that is in a class by itself, or it's the extreme example of a class. You could say that it's pointing at a word that's really the only one worthy of the name. And it doesn't have to be a good example. It could be a really bad example, the best of the class or the worst of the class. So John 1:21, ha prophetes esu, ? It's not are you a prophet, but are you the prophet? The Old Testament looked forward to the prophet who would come. Here in John, this question is asked, are you that prophet? 1 Corinthians 3:13, he hemera de lose. The day will reveal it. Well, there are many days, but the day this is talking about is the day, the judgment day. In that day, the day will reveal it. The article can also be used with a monadic noun. What we're talking about here is a one-of-a-kind type of a noun. Different than the last example of par excellence, we're not talking about the best of the class or the worst of the class, but we're saying there's only one of a kind. We're talking about words like the devil, or the sun, or the moon. Mark 13:24. Ha helios scatis thesetai, the sun will be darkened. Kai he selene u dose ta phengas autes, and the moon will not shed its light. Monadic nouns could be definite without the article, but we do find in the New Testament that sometimes monadic nouns have the article. Similarly, sometimes abstract nouns have the article. They don't always, but sometimes they do. What the article may be doing with abstract nouns is it's particularizing or specifying a certain example of that abstract noun. So maybe we're not talking about faith in general when we're using the article with the word faith, but we're pointing to a specific example of faith, a specific kind of faith. Maybe not love in general, but a specific type of love. So this is one idea about why does an abstract noun have an article sometimes. With abstract nouns, you're often not going to translate the article. So you're not going to say the love, but you're simply going to say love. Most of the time, this is what you would do. So speaking of love, 1 Corinthians 13:4, he agape makrothumai. Love is patient. Earlier in this passage, the article did not go with the noun agape, but once Paul starts to define love, he uses the article. It may be that he's particularizing what love really is. Another example, also with the abstract noun love, he agape anupokritos. Let love be without hypocrisy. Apostuguntes ta paneron, kalomenoi to agatho. So we see the article going with ta paneron, abhorring the evil, holding fast to the good. Now, I didn't highlight, but I could have even the first example, he agape. So here are abstract nouns with an article. It's certainly worth comment when Paul talks about love. Isn't it noteworthy that that which is evil cannot be part of love? There are certain activities people do which Scripture calls evil, sinful, unloving. True, genuine love that's without hypocrisy, abhors such things, and at the same time it holds fast to the good. In the 1 Corinthians 13 passage, it goes on to say that love does not rejoice in unrighteousness, which assumes that there is such a thing as unrighteousness. What we're seeing today is love taken hostage. There are all sorts of things people do in the name of love which are actually the opposite of love. We cannot love others by sinning with them. We cannot love others by sinning against them. We cannot love others by breaking God's commandments. The God who is love defines love, and if we want to surrender to His lordship, we've got to love the way He says to love. You may be surprised to find that proper nouns will sometimes have an article. One reason where this makes sense is with indeclinable names, such as Nathaniel. Indeclinable simply meaning that it doesn't go through different endings for different cases. So if it doesn't decline, how are you going to know what the function is in a particular context? Well, that's where our friend the article shows up and tells you. On other occasions, however, even with words that do decline, we'll sometimes see the article. And so it may be that the article occurs for emphasis, Some thoughts are that the article occurs because of a subject switch. We do sometimes see the article used anaphorically with a proper noun. So remember this concept again of pointing backwards. So the first time a name would be mentioned, it may not have an article, and then in subsequent uses, it might have an article. We don't normally translate the article with proper nouns. We don't say the Paul, usually. We don't say the John or the Jesus. We usually simply say Paul, John, or Jesus. Acts 8:1 and 9:1, talking about Saul. So in 8:1, we have Saulos without an article. In 9:1, when he's mentioned again, now that he's known, ha de Saulos. Now Saul, eti impneon apeles kai phanu eis tus mathetas tu kuriu. Now Saul was still breathing out, kind of literally here, threat and murder against the disciples of the Lord. So the first time we see Saul show up in Acts, there's no article. The second time, there is an article. We'll very frequently see the article with the name Jesus. Apokrytheste ha Jesus epen pros auton. But answering, or simply answering, Jesus said to him. This one's from Matthew chapter 3. Now, all of those examples were under the article with substantives and the particularizing, the pointing out type of function of an article. Still now, we're under the category of the article with substantives when it's not pointing out a specific individual, but it's making something generic or categorical. So what we're doing with this category is distinguishing one class from another, not one individual from another, not one object from other objects. This sort of function is grouping them together to make a class. And it points to the noun as a representative of a larger class. Often you'll see this sort of use when you have a universal statement. Now, some argue that such substantives are not definite. So the recent syntax volume by Mathewson and Emig, they would see this as an example of where the article does not make something definite. But others on the same question will say it's not making an individual definite, but it's pointing to a class, and it's making the class definite, such as Kostenberger, Merkel, and Plummer in their recent volume, Going Deeper with New Testament Greek. When you translate a generic article, you may use the English indefinite article a or an. And so you can see why some people would suggest that we're doing something that's not definite. But again, the response is, well, no, we're not talking about an individual that's definite, but the class is definite. See if you can add as a class to your kind of an explanatory translation and see if it makes sense, and you may have one of these. So, for example, Matthew 18:17, Esto soy hosper ha ethnikos kai ha telones. Let him be to you like ha ethnikos, like the Gentile, like a Gentile, and ha telones, and the tax collector. So here we're not talking about an individual, so it's not an individualizing article, but it's a categorical article pointing to this larger category, this larger class, the Gentile type of class, the tax collector type of class. Prosekete apaton pseudopropheton. Beware of false prophets. Not an individual false prophet per se, but all of them. Beware of the whole class of false prophets. If Jesus said that there would be false prophets claiming to speak in the name of the Lord but not actually speaking in the name of the Lord, and if Peter said it, and if Jude said it, and if Paul said it, guess what? It's going to happen, and it does happen all the time. So this first class was the article with substantives. Now what we want to look at is when the article is not going with the substantive, but it's acting like a pronoun. So the article can act like a personal pronoun, he, she, it, or they. It can act like a relative pronoun, who, which, or that. It can act like a possessive pronoun, his, hers, its, your. It can even act like an alternate pronoun, the one, the other, some, others. So let's take a look at these. The article can function like a personal pronoun in the nominative case. In particular, we're talking about third-person personal pronouns, he, she, it, or they. You will see this often in the min, de construction, min, ... de, or sometimes you'll see it simply with de. In the Gospels, you see this sort of thing all the time. Ha de apen autois, but he said to them. So the article ha acts like the pronoun he. This phrase occurs, I believe, 55 times in the Gospels. Here's a plural example. Hoi de apon auto, but they said to him. The article can also function like a relative pronoun. This is a who, which, or that type of pronoun. Oftentimes this will occur with genitives, with prepositional phrases, or with participles. So here's one with a prepositional phrase. Pater haimon ha in tois uranois. Our Father, well, which Father? The in the heavens Father. The one who is in the heavens. We would translate it, our Father who is in heaven. Philippians 3:9. Me ekon emein dikaiosunein tein ek namu. Not having my own type of righteousness, the ek namu type of righteousness. We would say, my own righteousness, which is ek namu, which is from the law. So this is the article as a relative pronoun. In certain contexts, the article can even function like a possessive pronoun, his or her or their. Now, it's not the article alone that indicates possession, but it's the whole context. And of course, context is always key in all of our syntactical decisions. Ephesians 5:25, hoi andres agapate tas gunaikas. Husbands, love your wives. Literally, husbands love the wives. Paul's not commanding husbands to love everybody's wife in the way that they love their own wife. But here in context, the article functions like this possessive pronoun, your. Husbands, love your wives. Matthew 4:20, hoide eutheos affintes ta dictua e kalutheson auto. And immediately, they, here's hoi as this personal pronoun, leaving the nets. Whose nets? Well, their nets. They followed him. So ta, acting like the possessive pronoun, there. Leaving the nets. Well, context tells us whose nets they were. It was their nets. The article can also function as an alternate pronoun. One, another, or some, and others. Now, this is also in the min de construction, and so you could view this as a subcategory of the article as a personal pronoun. I think it's probably worth splitting it into a separate type of example where you have this one, another idea, or some, and others. 1 Corinthians 7:7. Hekastas idion eke charisma ek theou, hamin hutos, hade hutos. But each one has his own gift, his own charisma from God. Hamin, the one, in this way, hutos, and another, hade, hutos, another in that way. That was a singular example. Here's a plural one. Eskisthe de ta plethos tes paleos, kai hoimen eson sun tois Judaiois, hoide sun tois apostolos. But the people of the city, they were divided. and hoi men, and some were with the Jews, but others were with the apostles. So hoi men, ... hoi de, some others. One of the things that the article can do is to make a different part of speech function like a noun. It's a substantive maker. It can do it with quite a range of things. Just a few things to mention: adverbs, adjectives, prepositional phrases, participles, infinitives, particles, finite verbs, and the list could actually go on. So the article can make these non-substantives act like substantives. So here's an example with both an adverb and a prepositional phrase. Ta ano phronete, me ta epites geis. Set your mind, think about ta ano, the above types of things. Ano is an adverb. The article ta goes with it. Set your mind on the above types of things, not on the epites geis types of things, not on things upon the earth. So the article takes this adverb, or it takes this prepositional phrase, and it makes it act like a noun. You've seen this with adjectives plenty of times. Here from the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:5, Makarioi hoi praes, hati autoi klerana mesusin tain gain. Blessed are the meek. Here's the article hoi with the adjective for meek, for they will inherit the earth. So the article can make an adjective act like a substantive. This is where an adjective doesn't modify a noun, it acts like a noun. And the article can help to accomplish that substantive making process. Now, another thing that the article does is it points out grammatical relationships. We could say it's a function marker. When the article does this, all these categories that we talked about above, they really get quite small. They really kind of hide away, maybe even becoming almost non-existent. And it's really the function marking type of thing that rises to the top in these sorts of occasions. The article can be used to show adjectival position. The article can also help to indicate the case of an indeclinable noun. We mentioned Nathaniel earlier, but there are other nouns that don't decline. How do you know what case they are? Well, you hope that you have an article there that does decline, and then you'll know. The article can accompany a participle, and it can reveal either substantival functions or adjectival functions. The article also goes with demonstrative pronouns, the houtos, ekainos type of pronouns, and in doing so, it helps point out attributive function. You've seen already this semester where the article is helpful in pointing out the subject and to distinguish the subject from a predicate nominative. So what happens when there's no article? Is the noun automatically indefinite? No, that's not the case. When there's no article, when a word is anarthrous, several things are possible. First off, it is possible that the word could be indefinite. So we're talking about a boy as opposed to the boy, a woman as opposed to the woman. If we're talking about one member of a class and we're not specifying which one, it could be indefinite. It could also be qualitative. Rather than being indefinite, focusing on one member of a class, some nouns focus on quality, nature, or essence, and this is quite common with abstract nouns. So some nouns may focus on one of these things, and we would say they're qualitative. And then the third possibility, it could actually be definite. So a word can be definite even without an article. So you can't simply say If there's no article, the word is indefinite. It doesn't work that way. So here are some occasions when you could have no article, but the word could still be definite. So if you have a proper name, John, Jim, Sally, Susie, with or without the article, that word is definite. An object of a preposition may or may not be definite. It is possible to have an object of a preposition without an article, and it can still be definite. You have to look at context and see. An ordinal number, such as first, second, or third, these would be definite. A predicate nominative could be definite, even without an article. We'll study more about that next week. A complement in an object complement construction, that might be definite. A one-of-a-kind noun, a monadic noun. Well, if they're one of a kind, it's definite. An abstract noun, such as love, faith, hope, these sort of abstract concepts, it's possible they could be definite. Then a genitive construction. There's something known as Apollonius canon and Apollonius corollary. Here's the canon, the rule. A genitive noun normally mimics the noun it modifies with respect to the article. In other words, if the head noun has an article, the genitive noun that modifies it will usually have an article. If the head noun has no article, the genitive noun usually has no article. So that's Apollonius canon. Now there's a corollary. If the head noun is anarthrous, that means it has no article, the genitive noun will normally be anarthrous, and, here's the point with respect to the article, it will share the same force in terms of it being either definite or indefinite or qualitative. So whatever the head noun is, usually that genitive noun is going to be the same, whether or not it has an article. A pronominal adjective such as all or whole could be definite with or without the article. And a generic noun could be definite. So don't buy into the procedure that some will suggest that if a word has no article, it's automatically indefinite. Next week, we will look at some extremely significant passages where some have claimed that that is the case, and we'll look at a couple of rules that show us that that is not the case. So more to come on this surprisingly important concept of the article.